Hey everyone, it's been over 2 minutes and I haven't been raped yet, but I was given a sexual assault survivor kit. It includes condoms, because when someone's going to rape you, you want to give them a choice of condoms. I got 2. I was also given a button. It says, "Got consent?" Because they've watched too much Dora Explorer and swipe or no swiping. Got consent? Aw, damn. Hi, I'm Diana Davison, Canadian eliminator of legal feminists. I've been discussing the work of Elizabeth Sheehy, law professor from the University of Ottawa, and her book called Defending Battered Women on Trial, Lessons from the Transcripts. We're on chapter 5 now, and I've been looking forward to telling you about this next case. On September 25th, 1993, Donelda Kay killed Dennis Gordon by stabbing him once in the heart, quite vehemently. She got away with this murder as a battered wife. What's stunning about this case is that Donelda was living at Dennis's apartment for 6 weeks. That is the length of her relationship with him. And apparently 6 weeks is all that's required for a woman to have a syndrome as a battered wife. Now, it's presented in this trial that Donelda Kay had a problem in leaving this relationship because she had multiple battering relationships prior to this. So for a woman to get away with killing you, you don't actually have to be the batterer yourself over any sort of time frame. You only have to be living with a woman who can say she's been battered in the past. Donelda Kay's problem was not in trying to leave the relationship. Her actual problem, as we get into the details of this story, is that she was trying to stay. So let's go over the scene. There was a drop-in house party going on. These types of things in these apartment buildings and in this lifestyle tend to happen because somebody shows up with a case of beer and a bunch of other people decide to show up. And Dennis had the kind of apartment where people would show up. Nobody had a phone when he was murdered, so we know it wasn't a highly coordinated event. Their neighbor from across the hall, who was only 15 years old at the time, her name is Rebecca, had been at this party earlier in the evening and got into a physical fight with a woman named Tracy. Rebecca lost the fight and sulked off and went to her apartment across the hall and started slamming her door for attention over and over and over again until another woman named Diane went over and bitch slapped her and told her to stop. So Donelda arrives and she's drunk to the point where she must have arrived home already having been drinking somewhere else and isn't enjoying the party in her own apartment, the apartment in which she's living. I'm not willing to say it was her own apartment at this point, and I'll explain why. So she goes over to Rebecca's place and finds out that Rebecca has one of her pairs of pants and that Dennis had given away her clothes. Now, it wasn't just a pair of pants or two, he'd actually given away almost all of her clothes. Now, how did those clothes get into this apartment? We know how these types of relationships work. You've got two people who hook up for a night, they kind of have fun, and they hook up for another night, and then the chick brings over some clothes a little bit at a time, and then at some point the guy realizes that the chick hasn't gone home. So during the 6-week relationship going on between Donelda, who was kind of squatting at Dennis's place, she actually left for about a week and went back to the reserve, which she had come from originally, or it was her go-to home. And so she was actually only living with him for 5 weeks out of 6, and I'd be surprised if she even had a key for his apartment. But she did have a bunch of stuff that she was stashing there, and Dennis decided that he wanted rid of it, so he gave it away free to a good home. So this is what started their fight that evening. She was freaking out because essentially, if you know anybody in this lifestyle, what he'd done was kick her out. He basically got rid of her possessions and was getting rid of her. And she was seen in this party, the only violence that was seen prior to the killing, she was seen slapping him, punching him, pushing him, and escalating violence over this spat that they were having. And she ended up across the hall at Rebecca's place, grabbed a knife off her floor, charged across the hallway, and stabbed Dennis in the heart. Shortly afterwards, Diane came back out, saw Donelda standing over Dennis's body, and bitch slapped the fuck out of Donelda. Actually, she punched her in the head a couple of times. So we're told that Donelda had bruises on her as some sort of evidence of violence against her. Yes, there was violence against her, and it was committed by another woman. In fact, all of the violence going on at this party that was witnessed and reported seems to have been women beating the fuck out of each other. So when witnesses got up and said, mostly her sisters, and said that they'd seen Donelda beat up in the past, we actually can't be sure who did it. They assumed it was Dennis, but there's the only witness of violence between Dennis and Donelda described what happened as they were going to go out that night. Donelda smashed a beer bottle over Dennis's head, and Dennis picked her up by the throat until she went unconscious, and then dragged her body off into another room, and he and his buddy went out drinking. I think, actually, having a beer bottle smashed over your head and responding with an angry look and picking somebody up is actually a rather restrained response. I'm surprised he didn't punch her in the head, as Diane probably would have done. And I suspect from the violence between the women at this party, there's a good chance that a lot of Donelda's bruises came from these women. Dennis's friends didn't seem to like Donelda. That's essentially why she was over at Rebecca's place instead of in Dennis's apartment, enjoying the party with everyone else. Now, Donelda didn't have to take the witness stand because she had 7 experts who testified for her. This is something that needs to be remedied. When a therapist who claims to have interviewed her or just to have read the case files gets up on the stand and testifies to the mental state of the person and testifies as to the reasoning behind their actions, what they're doing is substituting testimony of the accused, and the Crown cannot cross-examine the accused to verify the substance of the testimony. So they're testifying that they know this woman and they've talked to her, and that they can attest to her mental state and her circumstances at the time of the killing. And the Crown can't cross-examine them because their statements are their professionalized version of the events based on the best interests of the person who's paying them. This is normally not allowable in court, but Battered Women syndrome, since the case of Lavallee in Canada, allows experts to testify instead of the accused, so that the accused doesn't have to answer any questions. The experts can say, no, I've looked at it, and they absolutely fit the profile, and I can then tell you that everything that I'm telling you is true. It's just insanity. What Donelda did do was go to the police station, brought to the police station. She denied that she stabbed him, despite witnesses. And then they explained, the evidence they had and so on. And she goes, okay, well, I did stab him. And here's a repeat from past trials that have been discussed. She says, but he gave me the knife and he told me to stab him. Now, I'll just remind you that in the case of Lavallee, she said, he loaded the gun and gave it to me and told me to shoot him. And about 3 months after Lavallee's case was won in Supreme Court, we had Gladys Heavenfire say, he loaded the gun and gave it to me and told me to shoot him. And now we have this woman saying, but he gave me the knife and told me to stab him. This is an award-winning story, and it seems to result in acquittal. The biggest problem Donelda faced was that she was only in this relationship for 6 weeks, 5 if you take out the week she spent on the reserve. And that's not really long enough to qualify as a battered woman. So one of the experts brought in by her lawyer, Dr. Josie Catania, testified that she fit the profile of something called multiple serialized battering. And Josie Catania was an expert on this. She was an expert on this because she actually coined the term. Coined means invented. She made up this syndrome, and if you Google it, multiple serialized battering, you will find 0 results. So her testimony was crucial in getting Donelda Kay off of the murder charge, and it was based on a witness testimony, Dr. Josie Catania. If you Google her name, you won't find her either. That a testimony can get somebody off of a murder charge that's just been invented, and the person who invented it can say she's an expert in it, and now, like over a decade later, 2 decades later, there's no evidence that anybody ever approved of it. and yet it was allowed in court. What else is being allowed in court? These are just the cases that Elizabeth Sheehy is presenting to us, and they're absolutely obscene. I am stunned that these are the best examples that she could find. She studied some like 92 cases and chose the 17 best cases. So this is the cream of the crop, folks. This is the best examples that Sheehy could find to explain battered women to us. And they're using testimony from experts in their own syndromes that disappeared from sight because there's no such thing. It's all a bunch of bullshit being used to get women off of murder charges, to make sure that women never have to be responsible for their own choices in life or their own actions. And all of these justifications are being written in what amounts to a really condescending way of wealthy intellectuals and lawyers characterizing low-class lifestyles as a form of oppression. But I did come across a great article written by a man named Vincent Carroll, which I'm going to quote here. It was printed in the Telegraph, March 25th, 1991. He says, "Battered women are not the only people who feel trapped, after all. Many ghetto youth feel no less suffocated by poverty and lack of role models and opportunity. Are we soon to allow urban drug dealers and robbers to defend themselves in court by citing their long-time sense of helplessness? Presumably no. Whatever an individual's unfortunate background, he or she must, at least to some degree, be held responsible for a decision to end another human life." Donelda Kay was not a battered woman. She was a squatter who killed a man because he was throwing her out of her apartment after she'd been slowly trying to move herself in over 6 weeks. Donelda Kay lived a rough lifestyle, and, as most of the witnesses can testify, she didn't get along very well with other women. All of the bruises that were seen on her were seen after a day or two after they'd occurred, and there's absolutely zero evidence that Dennis hit her. In fact, the one time where he would have been all justified in hitting her because she broke a beer bottle over his head, he didn't do so. But after 6 weeks, Donelda Kay is, according to Canadian law, a battered woman and got away with murder. I'm going to make an appeal here for a little bit of funding. I will be doing a book response to Elizabeth Sheehy's book, and these videos are kind of part of my prep for that. But what I really would like to do is to purchase transcripts, and depending on how much money I get, I might be able to get the whole transcript, but I at least want to be able to buy the testimony of these psychobabblists who are getting these women off of the trials. I know that another judge has said that Dr. Fred Shane, who's testified in a number of them, has repeated his testimony almost verbatim. I want to get the testimony of these psychologists, and I want to put them all side by side and see if they are actually just talking generically or if they are getting paid for actually psychoanalyzing the individuals. And I know what my guess is. I'm pretty sure that the rest of you know the answer as well. But I won't be able to get these transcripts unless I get donations. You can go to my About page, and there's a link to donate to fund my work. And I hope you're getting a good idea of the kind of work that I can do. I'm a researcher, and to research I need to have materials to look at and to present. I try to give links whenever I can, and so that you can double check the accuracy of my reports. And if you would like a copy of the book so you can double check my reports of the stories in the book, then contact me at diana@canadiancock.org. Link is in the low bar, and please donate so I can get some of these transcripts. And now for the rape joke of the week, brought to us yet again by Nephenor. Come on, guys, get on it with the rape jokes. Two newfies are walking past a police station. They see a poster, says 2 black men wanted for rape. One turns to the other and says, "Them fuckers get all the best jobs."